It seemed logical that I would follow my video on the Nicomachean Ethics with a video on Aristotle's Politics, because it allows us to see how Aristotle's ethics can be applied to a political society. I should mention that just like Nicomachean Ethics, politics is actually derived from lecture notes and not an exhaustive text. Now sit back, relax, and pretend you're sitting in a lecture hall in the Lyceum nearly 2,500 years ago. Aristotle believed that politics could shape our moral character, and that was meant to be its true purpose. We still have hints of that to this day, but that certainly isn't the main purpose of government. Today, moral education comes from our families, religious communities, and other local organizations, while the government is more responsible for our safety and well-being. The idea that politics shapes our moral character goes nicely with Aristotle's idea of telos, which is essentially our purpose. A well-ordered political society provides a structure where people can build moral character, achieve eudaimonia, and as I once heard Jesus Christ be described as, to become fully human. To Aristotle, a political community is a partnership between citizens where they all seek to achieve virtue individually and collectively. Cities form because it's beneficial for men to collectivize, to increase the division of labor, and let each man achieve his highest potential. Aristotle also viewed the world quite hierarchically, seeing some people as being natural rulers and others as being naturally ruled. Within the family, he saw men as the natural rulers of women and children. He also extended this to slavery, where some people are naturally designed to be slaves and some are naturally masters. This, however, was meant to be beneficial to all, meaning that the ruler, master, and man of the house all had serious obligations to those that they had some control over. His justifications for all of these are somewhat shaky, but I will briefly present them here. He believed that slaves don't have the same level of reason that masters do, and therefore are naturally built to serve. In this way, he sees slaves as essentially human tools in the way that farmers may see an ox as a tool. It is proper for slaves to work and toil, and that is their telos, because they aren't capable of fully governing themselves, so having someone to govern them is beneficial to all parties. Of course, in return, the master must feed them, clothe them, and house them. He also doesn't fully apply this to all slaves, because many slaves were prisoners of war, which may still be fully rational human beings. His reasoning is a bit different when it comes to women and children, because he sees women as not as naturally aggressive or dominant as men, and with children he simply believes that they have yet to develop their reason. When it comes to property, Aristotle disagrees with Plato and Socrates, of course, that the city should not have private property or private families. He instead believes that differences between people are essential to a city, and that differences make it hard to share everything equally. He believed that everyone who is a proper citizen, and remember this is a small percentage of the Greek population, should have a period of time where they have a little bit of power in society, as well as serve on juries. He also believed that people value what is their own over what is owned by everyone, particularly if they have earned it in some fashion, which is still a common argument against communism and socialism today. He does not believe that it is the lack of common property that causes disruption within the city, but the lack of strong laws within the city that point citizens towards immoral behavior. You have to remember, again, that Aristotle believed laws are a sort of moral education, not just a means of keeping people from killing one another. This, of course, doesn't mean that there can be no laws affecting the unjust attainment of massive amounts of wealth, for instance, because a person obsessed with wealth is likely to care more about wealth than moral behavior. In regard to war, he believed that the Spartans were mistaken for seeing war as a virtue, because peace is the actual virtue, and war can sometimes be necessary to attain peace. His view on civil disobedience was essentially that it was the duty of the citizen to follow the laws and support the regime, though he did see the ideal citizen and ideal human as being potentially different in theory. One can be an ideal man by living his life according to telos, while not being a good citizen. Though you would be right to think that the ideal society would help a man find his telos, and therefore being the ideal citizen in this society would also make him the ideal individual. Aristotle has two main ways of dividing up political systems: how many people rule, and do they rule in societal interest or for self-interest. Monarchy is the rule of the individual for the common good. Aristocracy is the rule of the few for the common good. Polity is the rule of the many for the common good. Tyranny is the rule of the individual for himself. Oligarchy is the rule of a few in self-interest, and democracy is the rule of many in their own self-interest. Within any of these political systems, those who are the most moral should have the best claim to rule. When it comes to class, he used a similar concept as his ethics, where the middle of the road is generally best. Being middle class is best because you have the easiest time being virtuous. The poor are envious and also may be in situations to break laws to survive, while the rich have constant temptation and greed. We shouldn't have too much riches or too much poverty then. A regime with too much fighting between rich and poor will be destructive, and of course the most virtuous won't get involved because virtuous people don't want to be in conflicts or join factions. Aristotle's monarchs are not hereditary, but are instead the most virtuous citizens. This is important because we do not want rulers profiting off their status. Those that do rule in a high office need to be hardworking, virtuous, and have the respect for the role and for the city. In regards to wealth redistribution, he thinks trials need to be irregular, so that there isn't too much of a burden on the rich, because some money needs to be given to the jurors, since some of them are poor. He also doesn't like giving cash payments to the poor. He sees poverty as a problem in democracy, and thinks that rather than regular cash payments for the poor, the wealth should accumulate until it can be given to the poor in the form of land, or in a way that allows them to start a trade, because poverty does not allow them to build moral character. This, however, was somewhat counter to Jesus and monastics who live in poverty and focus solely on developing one's relationship to God. In regards to city size, he thought that the city cannot be too large, or it will be unmanageable, but not so small that it can't defend itself. The best city is the one which educates its citizens to be moral and supports its principles. The proper city needs to be near a port, but not on it, easily defended, capable of being easily exited in case of invasion, and easy to sustain farming. Lastly, he believed that proper education is absolutely essential and must be made by the city for all and not left up to the individual, because the city has one collective goal. He specifically talks about practical knowledge being the most important education because it allows citizens to achieve their telos and to be good citizens. I hope that you found this essay helpful, and I highly encourage you to take the time to read through Aristotle. Thank you.